The doorbell sliced through the quiet calm of our Tuesday evening, a sound so out of place it made me jump. My youngest grandson, Noah, looked up from the Civil War diorama we were carefully constructing on the living room floor, his tiny plastic soldiers frozen mid-battle. I opened the door, and my heart dropped. There stood my daughter Jessica, or Jessie Grace as she called herself online, and her partner, Brent. They stood on my welcome mat like two sterile apparitions, dressed head to toe in the kind of blinding white linen that screams, "We don't have kids who spill grape juice." They didn't hug me. They didn't even really smile. They just swept past me into the house, their eyes auditing every corner of the life I had built. Jessica's gaze landed on Noah, then flicked back to me, her expression unreadable. Brent cleared his throat, a smug, practiced sound. I offered them tea, a simple reflex of hospitality, but my daughter just waved a dismissive hand. "We aren't staying long," she said, her voice as crisp and empty as her outfit. "It's time for the kids to come home. This arrangement has gone on long enough. We're here to start the transition." The word transition hung in the air, cold and metallic. She said it like she was talking about a corporate merger, not the 3 children I had raised from scraped knees and night terrors. She was talking about my entire world. But that cold, corporate demand wasn't a beginning, it was an ending. To understand how my daughter could stand in my living room and talk about her own children like a hostile takeover, you need to understand the 12 years of silence, sacrifice, and secrets I'd kept locked away in a simple gray file box. That gray file box wasn't just for secrets, it was a ledger of my life, and its very first entry wasn't written in ink, but in tears and the cold, fluorescent lighting of a bank lobby. 12 years ago, that box didn't exist. 12 years ago, I still had dreams of my own. It all started with a phone call on a rainy Tuesday in March. I remember the scent of wet asphalt and blooming daffodils outside my kitchen window. It was Jessica, and she was hysterical. Not the worried mother kind of hysterical, but the frantic, self-pitying kind I'd come to know all too well. I couldn't make out most of the words, just a torrent of "I can't handle this" and "it's not fair." Finally, I got 3 clear words out of her. "Liam's in the hospital." I broke every speed limit getting there. The emergency room was organized chaos, the squeak of rubber soles on linoleum, the steady, impartial beeping of machines, the smell of antiseptic trying and failing to cover the scent of fear. I found them in a small curtained-off bay. My grandson Liam, only 7 years old, was a pale, small lump under a starchy white sheet, his face beaded with sweat. Jessica was pacing by the window, her phone pressed to her ear, complaining loudly to some friend about how her yoga retreat was now totally ruined. She didn't even notice me until I was standing right beside my grandson's bed. A kind, tired-looking doctor explained it was a classic case of appendicitis. It needed to come out, and it needed to come out now. It was routine, he assured me, but not optional. As he walked away, a woman with a clipboard and a practiced, sympathetic smile took his place. That's when the real emergency began. "Ma'am," she said to Jessica, "we've run your insurance information, and it appears the policy has lapsed. Payment was missed 2 months ago." Jessica's face went blank. "Lapsed? They were supposed to auto-draft. This is so typical. I can't be expected to remember everything." The woman's smile tightened. "I understand. For the surgery and a 2-night stay, the hospital will require a deposit of $12,000. $12,000. The number just hung there in the air, heavy and impossible. Jessica finally put her phone away and crumpled onto a plastic chair, her head in her hands. 12,000? Where am I supposed to get that kind of money? This is a nightmare. Why does this stuff always happen to me? She looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears, and in that moment she wasn't a 26-year-old mother. She was a child, expecting me to fix everything. And, like a fool, I always did. I thought about my late husband, Robert. He'd always said Jessica had a hole in her bucket, and no amount of love or money we poured in would ever fill it. He was right. My mind raced. My pension was enough to live on, but it wasn't enough for this, not even close. Then, a picture flashed in my mind, not of money, but of towering blue glaciers, majestic eagles, and the quiet deck of a cruise ship, my Alaska fund. Robert and I had planned that trip for years. It was going to be our 40th anniversary celebration. We had a big glass jar we put our spare change in, and a special savings account I'd fed religiously every month, even after he passed. It was more than a vacation. It was the last promise I'd made to him. On my nightstand, I still had the glossy travel brochure, its pages worn soft from a decade of dreaming. That account held just over $13,000. My last, personal, untouchable dream. I looked from my daughter's panicked face to my grandson's pained, sleeping one. There was no choice. There never really was when it came to the kids. I drove to the bank in a daze. The rain had stopped and the sun was glinting off the wet pavement, which felt like a cruel joke. I walked up to the teller, a cheerful young woman named Brenda, and asked to close a savings account. She tapped at her keyboard, her smile unwavering. "Of course, Carol. Cashing out the Dream Cruise Fund, huh? Finally heading north?" I just nodded, unable to speak. My throat felt thick with crushed icebergs and unspoken goodbyes. I watched as she processed the paperwork. My hand trembled as I signed my name on the line, the pen digging deep into the paper. It felt less like a signature and more like an amputation. She slid a cashier's check under the glass partition, made out to the hospital. All those years of saving, all those whispered promises to my husband, flattened into a single slip of paper. Back at the hospital, I handed the check to the woman with the clipboard. She took it, and her professional smile finally became genuine. Jessica snatched it out of her hand to look at the amount, her eyes wide. Relief washed over her face, so potent it was ugly. "Oh, thank God, Mom," she breathed, collapsing against me in a brief theatrical hug. I just couldn't handle any more drama today. She didn't say thank you. She didn't ask where the money came from or what it cost me. To her, it was just a problem that had been solved, a mess that had been cleaned up by someone else. I watched them wheel Liam off to surgery, and I felt a cold, quiet certainty settle in my bones. I had just bailed out a sinking ship, but I knew with the kind of clarity that breaks your heart that this was only the beginning. The very first thing I did when I got home that night was buy a simple gray fireproof file box. I placed the carbon copy of that cashier's check inside. It was the first receipt in what would become a long, painful chronicle of her irresponsibility and my sacrifice. That first receipt was a promise I made to myself, a promise that I would never forget the true cost of my daughter's choices. And as I snapped back from that bitter memory to the sight of Jessica and Brent, sitting expectantly on my living room sofa, the one my Robert and I had picked out at a furniture outlet 30 years ago, I realized the bill was finally coming due. I'd sent Noah upstairs to work on his homework, wanting to shield him from whatever this was. Liam and Maya were at their part-time jobs, a fact my daughter hadn't even bothered to ask about. She just sat there, legs crossed, a serene manufactured smile on her face. She took a delicate sip of the water I'd brought her. She'd refused my iced tea, saying something about alkaline levels, and placed the glass down on a coaster with a soft click. "So, Mom," she began, and the voice she used was not her own. It was her influencer voice, smooth, calm, and utterly devoid of genuine warmth. It was the voice she used to sell overpriced supplements and wellness retreats to her online followers. "Brent and I have been doing a lot of inner work lately. We've been focusing on creating a life of authentic alignment, and we've realized that a huge piece of our holistic puzzle has been out of place." She gestured vaguely, as if to encompass the entire house, my entire life. My hand tightened around the warm ceramic of my own mug. The puzzle piece she was talking about was her 3 children, the ones she'd dropped on my doorstep like a bag of donations for Goodwill 12 years ago. "We feel we're now in a space to offer them a more expansive environment," she continued, "one that fosters creativity and conscious living. We want to engage in a process of conscious reparenting." I almost choked on my tea. Conscious reparenting. It was all I could do not to laugh. I thought of the parent-teacher conferences I'd attended alone for 12 straight years. I thought of the scraped knees I'd cleaned, the fevers I'd nursed, the thousands of school lunches I'd packed. I thought of staying up until 2 a.m. helping Maya finish a science project that won her a blue ribbon. Was that not conscious enough for her? Brent leaned forward, placing his hand on Jessica's knee in a gesture that was meant to look supportive but just looked possessive. "Carol," he said, his voice a low, condescending purr, "what you've done here is admirable, truly. You've provided a baseline level of stability. You've been a fine placeholder." A placeholder. The words hit me with a physical force. A placeholder. Like a substitute teacher or a temp worker. All the years, all the sacrifices, all the love I had poured into those children, reduced to a temporary assignment. I carefully placed my mug down on the end table. The small clink was the only sound in the room, the only protest I allowed myself. The dream of my Alaskan cruise, long dead and buried, felt like a phantom limb, aching with indignation. "We just feel their potential is being capped here," Brent went on, oblivious. "We're talking about maximizing their human capital. We have a 5-year plan that involves immersive cultural travel, personalized nutrition, and integration into our personal brand. They have the potential to be powerful voices for their generation." And there it was. The bottom line. This wasn't about the children's well-being. It was about content. They didn't see Liam, Maya, and Noah. They saw 3 new props for their curated online fantasy. My grandchildren, my beautiful, complicated, wonderful grandchildren, were being pitched to me like a marketing campaign. Jessica jumped back in, her voice bright with phony enthusiasm. "Imagine it, Mom. Maya's art could be part of a whole series on creative expression. Liam's knack for mechanics could be a storyline about masculine energy and traditional skills. We could even create a junior wellness line inspired by Noah." The room felt hot, suffocating. I could smell the cloying, expensive scent of Brent's cologne, something with sandalwood and entitlement. They were talking about my husband's legacy, too. They brought up the trust fund Robert had painstakingly set up for the grandkids' education. They called it seed money for their new family venture, money they needed to manage to give the kids the opportunities they deserved. It was smoke and mirrors, a performance of caring so shallow it was transparent. They didn't love those children. They loved the idea of them, the image they could project, the engagement they could generate. They saw my grandchildren as a path to a bigger house, a better car, more followers. They finally finished their presentation, their voices echoing in the quiet, comfortable home I had fought so hard to maintain for them. They both looked at me, with the same bright, expectant smiles, as if they'd just offered me a wonderful gift. They truly believed I would just hand over the children, my entire life's work, like passing a baton in a relay race I never even knew I was running. I sat there in the worn floral armchair that had held me through so many sleepless nights of worry. I looked at my daughter, a stranger with my eyes, and her partner, a man who spoke of my grandchildren like they were stocks to be acquired. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. In my mind, I saw that gray file box, sitting in the dark, waiting. Every receipt, every school report, every tear-stained letter was a brick in the foundation of the truth. And I knew with absolute certainty that they were about to run headfirst into a wall they never even knew I'd built. They waited, their smiles starting to look like they were pinned on. The silence in my living room was no longer comfortable. It was a battlefield. In their minds, I'm sure they thought they had me cornered. I was just the old grandmother, the placeholder, the soft heart who had always cleaned up my daughter's messes. But as I sat there, I wasn't thinking about their polished pitch or their empty jargon. I was thinking about the solid, reassuring weight of that gray file box in my study. I was thinking about the difference between a story you tell and a life you can prove. I let out a slow, deliberate breath, the kind you take before you dive into deep water. I looked at Jessica, my daughter, and for a second, I didn't see the slick influencer. I saw the 7-year-old who'd thrown a tantrum in a department store because I wouldn't buy her a doll she didn't even want. The pattern was the same, only the toys had gotten more expensive. Then I looked at Brent, a man who used words like synergy to mask the simple, ugly greed in his heart. Finally, I spoke. My voice was quiet, much quieter than theirs had been, but it cut through the silence like a razor. No, it was just one word. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't justify or explain. I just delivered the period at the end of their long, delusional sentence. Jessica's smile twitched, then vanished. No? What do you mean, no? Mom, this isn't a negotiation. This is what's happening. We're their parents. Their parents? I leaned forward, just an inch, but it felt like a tectonic shift. A parent is the person who gets up in the middle of the night when a child has a nightmare. A parent is the one who learns how to calculate an algebra equation all over again because their son is struggling. A parent is the one who holds a screaming toddler in the emergency room after she falls off the monkey bars. I have done all of that, Jessica. You have done none of it. You don't get to waltz in here after 12 years of silence and talk about conscious reparenting. You don't know the first thing about parenting, conscious or otherwise. The influencer mask was gone. Her face flushed a blotchy red. That is so unfair. You don't know what I've been through. I had to find myself. I had to heal. You had to heal, I repeated, my voice still level. And while you were healing, who was healing Liam's broken arm after he fell out of the oak tree? Who was healing Maya's broken heart when she didn't get invited to the popular girl's birthday party? Who do you think was paying for the therapy, Jessica? The one they needed because their mother vanished from their lives? Brent stood up then, looming over my armchair. He crossed his arms, a classic bully's pose. Now, let's all just calm down. Carol, you're getting emotional. We understand you've formed an attachment, but legally, Jessica's rights as the biological mother supersede yours. We were hoping to do this the easy way, but if we have to, our lawyer is more than ready to file for custody. And frankly, a judge is not going to look kindly on a pensioner in an old house trying to keep children from their successful, financially stable parents. A lawyer. The threat was finally out in the open, naked and ugly. They thought it was their trump card. They thought it would make me fold, just like I always had. They saw a tired old woman. They had no idea they were talking to a librarian. My entire life had been spent in the service of facts, of categorization, of primary sources. I didn't just live through the last 12 years, I archived them. I rose slowly from my chair, my joints protesting, but my spine was made of steel. I was shorter than both of them, but in that moment, I felt like the tallest person in the room. I walked over to the mantelpiece and straightened a framed photo of the 3 kids at last year's county fair, their faces sticky with cotton candy and bright with pure, uncomplicated joy. My work. I turned back to them. I looked at Brent first, his smug confidence already starting to curdle into confusion at my lack of fear. Then I looked at my daughter. Jessica, I said, and my voice was soft, almost a whisper, which made them lean in to hear. You can get a lawyer. You can file whatever papers he tells you to. You can stand up in front of a judge and tell whatever story makes you feel better about the choices you've made. I paused, letting the weight of the silence gather around them again. But be very careful what you decide to do, because unlike you, I keep meticulous records of everything. My gaze flickered between them, sharp and pointed. I always have. The air in the room changed. It wasn't a guess or a bluff. They heard the ring of absolute truth in my voice. Jessica's jaw went slack, Brent's arms uncrossed, a crack in his armor of arrogance. They didn't know what I meant, not exactly. They couldn't picture the receipts, the emails, the school records, the notarized statements from neighbors. They couldn't picture the gray file box, but they could feel its shadow. It fell over them, cold and heavy, the sudden, terrifying chill of consequences they had never once believed they would have to face. They left without another word. The heavy silence they left behind was worse than their shouting would have been. I watched from my window as their gleaming white SUV, a car that probably cost more than my entire kitchen renovation, crunched over the gravel of my driveway and disappeared down the street. For a week, that silence held. Every time the phone rang, my heart leaped into my throat. Every car that slowed down on our street sent a jolt of anxiety through me. A small, foolish part of me started to hope that my warning had been enough, that they had looked into the abyss of a real fight and decided their comfortable, curated life wasn't worth the trouble. It was the kind of hope you have for a storm on the horizon, praying it will blow itself out before it reaches your house. But the storm didn't blow over. It made landfall the following Tuesday, delivered by Dave, our mail carrier for the last 15 years. He stood on my porch holding not a stack of bills and catalogs, but a single, ominous, large manila envelope. It was a certified letter, the green and white sticker, a flag of impending doom. "Got to sign for this one, Carol," he said, his usual cheerful voice subdued, as if he knew he was delivering a verdict. My hand trembled as I signed my name on his little electronic gadget. The envelope felt heavy in my hands, thick with importance. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart hammering against my ribs. I knew what it was. This was them calling my bluff. I carried it into the kitchen and laid it on the table, right where Noah did his homework every day. It looked obscene there, a legal contamination of our safe space. I slid it open with a butter knife. The paper inside was thick, creamy, and cold to the touch. It smelled sterile, like a lawyer's office. And the words were a language I didn't speak, a brutal dialect of whereas and hereinafter and pursuant to. But the meaning was horribly clear. It was a formal petition for a court-ordered mediation to transfer legal guardianship of Liam, Maya, and Noah Vance from myself to their biological mother, Jessica Vance. But it was the accusations, listed in neat, numbered paragraphs that stole the air from my lungs. I sank into a kitchen chair as I read them. Allegation 1. That the current guardian, Carol Vance, has systematically engaged in parental alienation. Allegation 2. That the guardianship is financially motivated, intended to maintain control of the minor's trust fund. Allegation 3. That the home environment, while superficially stable, lacks the resources to foster the children's full intellectual and emotional potential. Each line was a carefully crafted dagger. My 12 years of love and labor twisted into something ugly and criminal. The PTA meetings, the trips to the library, the garage sale treasure hunts for outgrown winter coats, all of it reframed as a calculated plot. The money from my own husband's trust, the money I'd guarded so fiercely for their future, was now the supposed motive for my greed. I felt a hot, dizzying wave of rage and helplessness wash over me. They were using the very system designed to protect children to try and tear our family apart, and they were using the truth as the foundation for their lies. I sat there for what felt like an hour, the papers spread out before me, a testament to my daughter's betrayal. For a moment, I felt the crushing weight of what they were doing. They had money. They had a slick lawyer. I was just a retired librarian with a fixed income. How could I possibly fight this? My eyes drifted from the cruel words on the page and looked through the doorway into my small study. I could see the corner of the old oak filing cabinet, and I knew what was inside. That single thought was an anchor in the storm. I wasn't just a grandmother. I was the keeper of the record. I picked up my phone and called Sarah, my friend since before Jessica was even born. They did it, was all I said. Panera in 20 minutes, she replied, no questions asked. When I walked in, the smell of coffee and warm bread wrapped around me, a comforting scent from a world that still made sense. Sarah was already in a booth with 2 coffees. I slid the manila envelope across the table without a word. She pulled out the documents, and her face, usually so full of humor and warmth, hardened as she read. Her lips grew thinner and thinner with every paragraph. When she finished, she stacked the papers neatly, her movements sharp and angry. "That little witch," she hissed, her voice low and furious. "After everything you've done. Parental alienation? I was there the day she dropped them off, Carol. I saw the state they were in. Financially motivated? I helped you plan the bake sale to raise money for Maya's braces." Her anger was a relief, a confirmation that I wasn't crazy, that the injustice was as real and as stark as I felt it was. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. I took a long sip of my coffee, the warmth steadying my hands. I thought of my husband Robert and his quiet strength. He never picked a fight, but he never, ever backed down from one. I looked at the legal papers, at their attempt to build a fiction strong enough to break us. A fiction. And I knew what a librarian does with fiction. You put it in its proper place, far away from the nonfiction section, where the truth resides. "I'm going to fight," I said, and for the first time since Dave handed me that envelope, my voice didn't tremble. "They want to build their case on lies and legalese." "Fine." I looked out the window, but I wasn't seeing the parking lot. I was seeing a steel gray box and a locked file drawer. I'll build mine on the truth, every last, documented piece of it. I drove home from Panera with a strange sense of calm. The fear that had been a cold knot in my stomach for the past week hadn't vanished, but it had changed. It had crystallized into something hard and clear. Resolve. They had declared war, assuming I was an unarmed civilian. They had no idea I'd been quietly fortifying my position for 12 years. I didn't bother taking off my coat. I walked straight past the living room, past the kitchen, and into my small study. This room has always been my sanctuary. It's not fancy, just floor-to-ceiling bookshelves Robert built for me, my old reading chair, and the sturdy oak filing cabinet we bought at a garage sale 20 years ago. It's a room built on the quiet, steady power of the written word. I knelt, the familiar ache in my knees a dull complaint, and pulled a small key from the secret pocket in my wallet. The key slid into the lock on the bottom drawer with a soft metallic whisper. The drawer slid open smoothly, revealing the object of my thoughts, the steel gray archival file box. The Chronicle, I'd called it in my head, a librarian's private joke. It was heavy when I lifted it, not just with the weight of paper, but with the weight of years. I placed it on my desk, the surface cleared of everything else, and for a moment, I just looked at it. It was plain, functional, fireproof, a box designed to protect what was valuable. And what was inside was the most valuable thing I owned: the truth. I unlocked the latch on the box itself, the sharp click echoing in the silent room, and lifted the lid. The scent of old paper and printer ink rose to meet me. Inside there was no chaos. There was only order. A dozen neatly labeled accordion files stood at attention, their tabs a silent testament to a long and painful history. My fingers, a librarian's fingers, traced over the labels. The first file was labeled medical. I pulled it out. On top was the carbon copy of the $12,000 cashier's check for Liam's emergency appendectomy. Clipped to it was a printout of the hospital bill, showing a remaining balance of $800 for follow-up care, a balance Jessica had sworn she would handle. Tucked behind it was the collections notice that had arrived 6 months later, which I'd paid out of my grocery budget. I remembered the phone call, her breezy excuse, "Oh, Mom, I totally forgot. Things have been so crazy with this new yoga certification." Next to it was the file for education. It was thick. It held copies of every report card, every permission slip I'd ever signed. There were printouts of emails from teachers, addressed to me, praising Maya's artistic talent or expressing concern over Noah's shyness after his mother's last-minute canceled visit. There was the $500 receipt for Liam's tutoring in algebra after Jessica had promised to help him and then got swamped for 8 weeks straight. Each paper was a small, quiet story of her absence and my presence. My hand hovered over the next file, its label sharper, more personal: broken promises. This one hurt to open, but it was necessary. It was filled with printouts of text messages and emails, a digital graveyard of my daughter's good intentions. On my way. Be there in an hour. From a text sent on Maya's 10th birthday, followed by another 4 hours later. So sorry, something came up, rain check. Maya had cried herself to sleep that night, clutching the lopsided birthday cake we had baked for her. There was the email promising to take the kids school shopping and the Target receipts showing I had done it myself 2 days before school started, after she never showed up. There was even a non-refundable deposit for a small cabin rental for a weekend trip she had planned and then bailed on, leaving me to explain to the children why their mother, once again, wasn't coming. Then I pulled out the file labeled Digital Footprints. This was the file of her other life, the one she curated for strangers while neglecting her own blood. I had methodically, over the years, printed out screenshots from her social media. Here was a picture of her in a designer dress at a charity gala in Chicago, time-stamped on the same day she'd claimed she was too broke to help pay for Noah's summer camp. Here was a photo of her and Brent on a beach in Mexico, captioned, "Living my most authentic life," posted a week after she'd canceled a visit because she needed a mental health retreat. The hypocrisy was so stark, so shameless, it made me feel dizzy. I placed the files back in the box, my movements slow and deliberate. This wasn't a collection of grievances. It wasn't a daughter's diary of complaints. It was an archive. It was a librarian's answer to a life of chaos, order, evidence, and irrefutable facts. Each receipt was a footnote. Each email was a primary source. Each broken promise was a chapter in the story of her abandonment. They had come into my home armed with jargon and threats. They believed the story they told themselves, that they were the healed, successful parents, and I was just the elderly placeholder. They were about to learn that I was the historian of this family, the one who kept the records. I closed the lid of the chronicle, the latch clicking shut with a sound of utter finality. The next time this box was opened, it wouldn't be in the quiet of my study. It would be in a sterile conference room, and every single piece of paper inside it would be given a voice. The next time that box was opened, the air didn't smell of old paper and memories. It smelled of stale coffee and the cheap wood polish of a legal conference room in a soulless office park off the highway. It was a place where families came to be formally broken, and I was determined that mine would not be one of them. I'd met my legal aid lawyer, Maria Sanchez, a week before. She was young, sharp as a tack, and had the tired eyes of someone who fought for the underdog for a living. She'd looked through my chronicle, her expression shifting from professional curiosity to a kind of quiet, simmering fury. She was on my side. When we arrived, she carried a slim briefcase. I carried the heavy steel gray box. The room was as sterile as a hospital. A long, polished table reflected the humming fluorescent lights above. Jessica and Brent were already there with their lawyer, a man in a $1,000 suit with a face as smooth and unreadable as a riverstone. They sat on one side, a united front of affluence and confidence. Jessica gave me a small, pitying smile, the kind you'd give a stray cat. Brent didn't even look at me. I placed the Chronicle on the floor beside my chair. It sat there, plain and unassuming, next to the lawyer's shiny Italian leather briefcase. It looked like a tugboat next to a yacht. The mediator, a woman named Miss Albright, entered and laid out the ground rules with practiced neutrality. Then she turned to my daughter's lawyer. "Mr. Davies, you may begin." Mr. Davies rose, and the performance began. He painted a masterful picture. He spoke of Jessica as a young woman who had been overwhelmed by the profound challenges of early motherhood, a victim of postpartum depression in a time when it was deeply misunderstood. He used words like courage and resilience to describe her journey. He spoke of her years away not as an abandonment, but as a period of intensive healing and personal growth. My hands were clasped so tightly in my lap my knuckles were white. I focused on the cheap, swirling pattern of the wood grain on the table. A period of healing. I thought of the screenshot in my box of her on a beach in Thailand, a margarita in her hand, with the caption number healing. Then it was Jessica's turn. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue as she spoke, her voice thick with rehearsed emotion. I wasn't the mother they deserved back then, she said, her gaze fixed on the mediator. I was broken, and I knew I couldn't give them the life they needed until I had fixed myself. Leaving them was the hardest thing I've ever had to do, but I did it for them, so I could come back whole. And now I'm whole. I have a stable, loving partner. We have a successful business. All that's missing are my children. She sounded so convincing. Her pain seemed so real. If I hadn't lived through the last 12 years, I might have believed her myself. My lawyer, Maria, placed a steadying hand on my arm for a brief second, a silent message. "Stay calm. Our turn is coming." Brent then presented their financial portfolio, a thick binder full of bank statements and income projections from their Jessie Grace Wellness brand. It was all designed to look impressive, to show six-figure earnings and a future of limitless potential. It was a fantasy novel, bound in leather. Mr. Davies stood for his closing statement, his voice dripping with condescending sympathy. "Miss Albright," he said, "the choice here is clear. On the one hand, we have the children's biological mother, a vibrant, successful woman in the prime of her life, ready and eager to provide her children with every opportunity. On the other," he gestured towards me without even looking, "we have a grandmother. A loving one, I'm sure, but a woman on a fixed income, living in an old home, ill-equipped to prepare these children for the demands of the modern world. This isn't about punishing anyone. It's about what's best for the children's future. And their future is with their mother." He sat down, the picture of victory. They had built their case perfectly. They had created a story, a compelling fiction of redemption and success. They had painted me as a relic, a loving but ultimately inadequate obstacle to progress. The room was silent. I could feel the weight of their narrative settling over the table, pressing down on me. Their fiction was so strong, so polished. But I wasn't armed with a story. I was armed with a library. Miss Albright made a few notes on her legal pad, her face giving nothing away. She looked up, her gaze passing over Jessica and Brent, over Mr. Davies, and finally, settling on me. "Thank you, Mr. Davies," she said, her voice even. She then turned her full attention to our side of the table. "Miss Sanchez, Mrs. Vance, your response?" My lawyer, Maria Sanchez, gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "We do have a response, Miss Albright," she said, her voice even and clear. She turned to me. "Carol, would you please place your files on the table?" Every eye was on me as I bent down and lifted the Chronicle. I placed it in the center of the table with a solid, definitive thud that seemed to shake the entire room, the sound of steel on polished wood. It wasn't a sound of aggression, it was a sound of fact. Jessica's lawyer, Mr. T. Davies, glanced at the plain gray box with a dismissive air, as if I'd just placed my knitting on the table. Jessica just looked confused. Maria stood, but she didn't pace or posture like Mr. Davies had. She simply opened the box. "Mr. Davies has painted a compelling picture of my client's daughter," she began. "A story of healing, growth, and renewed stability. We are not here to offer a competing story. We are here to offer the record." She reached into the first file, labeled Financials, and pulled out a single sheet of paper, placing it in front of the mediator. "Exhibit A," she said, A collections notice addressed to Mrs. Carol Vance for the outstanding balance of her grandson Liam's post-operative care. A bill her daughter Jessica assured her she would handle. I saw a flicker of panic in Jessica's eyes. Mr. Davies leaned over and whispered something to her. Exhibit B, Maria continued, laying down another document. It was the cashier's check for $12,000. The deposit for that same life-saving surgery, paid for by Carol, from an account she was forced to liquidate. My mind flashed to the glossy cruise brochure, a ghost of a dream. Mr. Davies spoke of his client's financial stability. For the next exhibit, I'd like to present a summary of documented, unreimbursed expenses paid by my client for the basic welfare of the children over the past 12 years. She didn't present a summary. She began placing receipts on the table, one after another, like a dealer laying out a winning hand. A $200 Costco receipt for back-to-school supplies, a $70 copay for Noah's asthma medication, a receipt for new sneakers, another for winter coats. The pile grew, a mountain of paper testifying to the relentless, unglamorous, expensive reality of raising children. The total, Maria said coolly, is just over $87,000. We have not included food or housing. The color was draining from Mr. Davies's face. Brent was staring at Jessica, his jaw tight. Now, Maria said, turning to a new file, let's address the period of intensive healing. She pulled out 2 documents and laid them side by side. On the left was a printout of an email from Jessica to me, dated April 12th, 4 years ago. I can't make Maya's birthday, I heard Maria read. I'm just in a terrible headspace and I'm completely broke. I need to stay home and focus on myself. On the right was a screenshot from Jessica's Instagram feed, dated April 14th of the same year. It was a bright, sunny picture of her and Brent, clinking champagne glasses at a poolside cabana at a luxury resort in Arizona. The caption read, Investing in myself, number self-care, number healing journey. A small, choked sound escaped Jessica's throat. Maria didn't pause. She laid out another pair, an email claiming car trouble and the expense of the drive. A photo of a brand new car in their driveway, posted a week later. Another pair. A text message about needing to work a double shift. A Facebook check-in at a high-end spa. It was a brutal, relentless rhythm of lies and evidence. Fact, fiction. Fact, fiction. Finally, Maria said, opening the last files, let's talk about the accusation of parental alienation. She placed a stack of papers in front of the mediator. These are printouts from the school district's parent portal for all 3 children, for every year. As you can see, Carol Vance is listed as the primary, secondary, and emergency contact. Jessica Vance is not listed at all. Here are emails from teachers, notes from the school nurse, permission slips for field trips, all signed by Carol. She slid another paper across the table. Her voice was cold now, all pretense of professional courtesy gone. This is a text from Maya, then 14, to her mother. It reads, The school play is Friday. I have a solo. It would mean the world to me if you came. And this, she laid another printout beside it, is the reply from Jessica, sent an hour before the performance. So swamped, sweetie. Break a leg. Catch the next one. I remembered that night perfectly. I remembered holding Maya backstage as she cried, her beautiful costume dampened by her tears, before she wiped her eyes, walked onto that stage, and sang her heart out for an audience of 1. Maria let the silence hang in the room for a moment before delivering the final blow. She reached into the very back of the box and pulled out one last, folded, yellowing piece of paper. But of course there's a reason my client was the only parent involved, she said, her voice dropping. Because 12 years ago, 3 days after leaving her children on my client's doorstep, Jessica Vance wrote and signed a letter. She unfolded it and placed it on the table. Even from across the room, I could see my daughter's familiar loopy handwriting. It begins, Maria said, reading directly from the document, her voice clear and unforgiving. Mom, take them. I can't do this. I need to be free to build a new life. I'm signing over educational and medical rights. You handle it. She looked up, her gaze pinning Jessica to her chair. She didn't just abandon her children. She documented it. She didn't just abandon her children. She documented it. The words hung in the dead air of the conference room. No one moved. No one breathed. It felt like a vacuum, a space where all the lies and hot air had been sucked out, leaving only the cold, hard truth sitting on the table in my daughter's looping cursive. The Chronicle sat before us, its job done. It was no longer a box of secrets, it was a monument to the facts. I watched Jessica's face. It was a crumbling ruin. The confident, serene mask of Jessie Grace had disintegrated, and beneath it was just a terrified, lost woman. Her eyes were wide with a dawning horror, not of what she had done, but of what had been done to her. She was a performer whose stage, lighting, and script had just been set on fire. Across from her, Brent wasn't looking at her with sympathy. He was staring at her with the cold, dead eyes of a banker looking at a defaulted loan. His investment had gone bad. Their lawyer, Mr. Davies, was the first to move. He slowly, deliberately began to slide his expensive, untouched legal pads into his leather briefcase. He didn't slam it shut. He closed it with a soft, expensive click, the sound of surrender. The mediator, Miss Albright, finally broke the silence. She cleared her throat, and her professional neutrality was gone, replaced by a tone of icy finality. "Well," she said, her eyes fixed on Mr. Davies but her words aimed at my daughter. "I believe this mediation is concluded." She took a pen and made a sharp, decisive checkmark on her paperwork. "For the record, my recommendation to the court will be unequivocal. Not only will Mrs. Carol Vance's legal guardianship be made permanent, but I will also be recommending that the court order your client, Miss Vance, to cover all legal fees for filing what is, in my 30 years of experience, one of the most frivolous and malicious petitions I have ever witnessed." Jessica made a sound, a wounded gasp, but her lawyer placed a hand on her arm, silencing her. "We understand, Miss Albright," Mr. Davies said, his voice a flat monotone. "We withdraw the petition." He stood, gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod to Maria, and then steered his weeping, catatonic client out of the room like a piece of damaged cargo. Brent followed them, his movements stiff with rage. Maria began packing her own slim briefcase. "You did it, Carol," she said softly, a small, proud smile on her face. I just nodded, feeling a wave of exhaustion so profound I could have slept for a week. The victory didn't feel like a rush of adrenaline. It felt like putting down a weight I'd been carrying for 12 years. As we walked out into the sterile hallway, we saw them. They were standing near the elevators, and the performance was officially over. Brent had Jessica backed against the wall, his voice no longer a condescending purr but a low, vicious hiss. "You told me it was a sure thing," he snarled, his face inches from hers. "You said she was a sentimental old fool who would fold. You told me the trust fund was practically ours." I didn't know she kept things," Jessica sobbed, wiping at her face, smearing her expensive makeup. "I didn't know about the letter." "The letter?" Brent let out a short, brutal laugh. "The letter was the least of it. The receipts, the emails, the Instagram posts. Did you think you were invisible? Did you think no one was paying attention?" He took a step back, looking her up and down with utter contempt. "I invested 2 years and $50,000 in you, in your brand, in this family reunion plan. 50 grand for the lawyers, for the clothes, for this entire stupid show. I told you, if we get the kids, we get control of the money. It was a simple business plan." "It wasn't a business plan, it was our life," she cried. "It was an investment," he shot back, his voice rising. "An investment in your $500,000 inheritance that you just blew because you were sloppy and sentimental. You're not a brand, Jessica. You're a bad investment." And with that, he turned on his heel and strode toward the elevators without a backward glance. He stabbed the down button, the door slid open, and he was gone. Jessica just stood there, completely alone in the middle of the bland corporate hallway, next to a wilting ficus tree and a water cooler. Her perfect white linen outfit was wrinkled, her face was a mess of tears and mascara, and she was surrounded by the smoking wreckage of the life she had chosen. She had traded her children for a man who saw her as a line item on a spreadsheet. She had tried to steal their future and, in the process, had completely demolished her own. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel pity. I just felt a profound and weary sadness for the daughter I had raised and the stranger she had become. Maria touched my elbow gently. "Let's go home, Carol," she said. We walked to the other end of the hall, to a different elevator bank, leaving my daughter behind with the consequences she had so meticulously earned. The elevator descended in silence, a slow, humming return to earth after the battle in the sky. Maria and I didn't speak on the drive home. There was nothing left to say. When I walked back into my own house, the scent of the pot roast I'd put in the slow cooker that morning greeted me. The air was warm and smelled of home, of reality. I walked past Noah's half-finished diorama, a snapshot of a real, messy, wonderful childhood, and felt a quiet, bone-deep gratitude. My world was safe. My world was true. I wasn't there, of course, for what happened next in my daughter's life. But in a small town, news travels, and the walls of those new, paper-thin apartment complexes might as well be made of tissue paper. What I know, I pieced together later from a neighbor of hers who told my friend Sarah what she'd overheard through the vents that evening. Jessica apparently arrived back at her stark white apartment, her content creation studio, as she called it, like a ghost. The neighbor said she heard the door open and close, and then nothing for almost an hour, just silence. I imagine her standing in the middle of that big, empty white room, the one with the single, uncomfortable-looking sofa, and the one artfully placed fiddle-leaf fig tree. I imagine her looking at the tools of her trade, the ring light standing in the corner like a robotic cyclops, the vision board on the wall covered in pictures of other people's lives, the stack of her favorite self-help books arranged in a perfect color-coordinated stack on the floor. All the props for a life, with none of the substance. The real noise started when Brent got home. There was no shouting at first, just the cold, hard sounds of a life being dismantled. The sound of drawers being yanked open, the angry zip of a suitcase, the clatter of expensive kitchen gadgets being dumped into a cardboard box. The neighbor said she heard Jessica's voice, thin and pleading. "What are you doing? We can fix this. We can re-strategize." Brent's reply was clear and brutal. "There's nothing to re-strategize, Jessie Grace. The brand is dead. The primary investors your kids pulled out." I can just picture him, his handsome face twisted with a rage that was all business. He wouldn't have been packing just his clothes. He would have been liquidating the assets. The $1,000 espresso machine they featured in their Mindful Morning series. The professional-grade podcasting microphone they used for their Authentic Living show. Even the Vitamix blender. Each item he took was a piece of their shared fiction, a prop from the stage he was now striking with ruthless efficiency. "This isn't about the brand, this is about us," she must have cried. "This was always about the brand," the neighbor heard him yell back, his voice finally breaking its cold composure. "The brand was the business was the money. You were the face, I was the strategy, and the kids were supposed to be our next-level funding. Phase 2. But you couldn't even close the deal. You let your sentimental old mother with her shoebox full of receipts outsmart you." It must have been then that she truly understood. Her partner, her soulmate, the man whose vision she had adopted as her own, saw her as nothing more than a faulty piece of equipment, the face of a company that had just gone bankrupt. "So that's it?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "You're just leaving?" He probably stopped in the doorway, his suitcases in hand, and looked back at the beautiful woman who was the centerpiece of his failed project. The neighbor said his final words were the coldest of all. "I'm a life coach, Jessica. I help people maximize their potential. Your potential just flatlined. I have to protect my own brand now, and being associated with a failure isn't good for business." The neighbor heard the front door slam shut, a sound with the finality of a gavel. And then, once again, there was silence. A different kind of silence this time. Not the empty silence of a minimalist apartment, but the vast, echoing silence of a life that had been hollowed out. I picture my daughter standing alone in that sterile white box, the evening light fading outside, surrounded by all the beautiful, meaningless things she had chosen over her own children. The brand had collapsed, the partnership was dissolved, the influencer was offline. All she was left with was herself, and for the first time in a very long time there was no one watching. For the first time in a very long time, there was no one watching. An influencer without an audience is just a person in a room, and the room my daughter found herself in was a cold, white, half-empty box of her own making. I often wonder what that first night alone was truly like for her. I picture her sinking down onto the floor, the expensive hardwood cold against her skin, the silence of the apartment a roaring in her ears. For years, her life had been a constant performance, a never-ending stream of posts and stories and carefully crafted captions. Silence was the one thing her brand could never sell, and the one thing she could never escape. Her first instinct, I'm sure, was to reach for her phone. It was more than a device to her. It was a lifeline, a mirror, the source of all her validation. Maybe she opened her social media, her thumb hovering over the button to go live, or post a dramatic, cryptic quote about rising from the ashes. But what would she say? Who would she be performing for now? Brent, her director and co-star, was gone. Her audience of strangers suddenly felt a million miles away. The performance was over, and she had forgotten how to be a person when the cameras were off. So instead, she must have gone to her camera roll, a digital archive not of her life, but of the life she wanted people to think she had. I imagine her scrolling backward, her thumb flicking past years of meticulously curated lies, thousands and thousands of photos. There were the food pictures, the perfect latte art, the artfully messy avocado toast, the colorful salads she probably never ate. There were the fitness pictures, the mirror selfies in expensive workout gear, her face glistening with professionally applied sweat, the yoga poses on a cliff at sunrise. And there were the pictures with Brent, hundreds of them, the staged, candid, laughing shots. The romantic vacation photos where they stared into each other's eyes, their smiles perfectly calibrated for maximum engagement. The selfies in the white SUV, captioned with hashtags about being power couples and building an empire. Looking at them now, she must have seen the truth. They weren't pictures of a relationship, they were advertisements for a product that had just been recalled. And then, I imagine a strange clarity cutting through her grief, an impulse she didn't understand. Her thumb, which had for so long hovered over the share button, now found the delete button, and she began to erase it all. A picture of a $500 smoothie bowl, gone. A selfie with Brent, captioned soulmates, deleted. She must have swiped and deleted, a frantic cleansing fire. She was deleting the evidence, not of her crimes, but of her own emptiness. Hundreds, maybe thousands of photos, vanishing into the digital ether, each deletion a small, painful admission that none of it had ever been real. Her thumb stopped. She had scrolled back years, back to the very beginning of her phone's memory. And there, tucked away in a hidden album she must have created and forgotten long ago, was a single file. An old video, transferred from a device so ancient it was practically an artifact. The thumbnail was blurry, just a flash of green and blue. Her heart must have been pounding as she tapped on it. The video flickered to life. It was short, only 15 seconds long, and the quality was terrible. It was shaky, grainy, the sound muffled by the wind. But it was real. It was a city park, 13 years ago. The sun was bright, the grass was a vibrant green. A much younger Jessica was on the screen, her hair in a messy ponytail, wearing an old t-shirt and jeans. She wasn't posing. She wasn't even aware of the camera. She was laughing, a sound so open and carefree it was almost shocking. And she was pushing a tiny, giggling Liam on a swing set. He was so small, his little legs kicking at the air, his face a blur of pure joy as he shouted, "Higher, Mommy, higher!" The video captured the simple, perfect rhythm of it, the gentle creak of the swing chains, Liam's squeals of delight, and underneath it all, her own laughter. Not the quiet, polite laugh from her influencer videos, but a deep, genuine, from the belly laugh of a mother completely lost in a moment with her child. The 15 seconds ended. The video started again on a loop. The creak, the giggle, the laugh. The creak, the giggle, the laugh. And that's what must have finally broken her, the sound of her own, long-forgotten happiness. I picture the phone slipping from her numb fingers and clattering to the floor. I picture her curling into a ball, her body racked with silent, ugly sobs that had nothing to do with performance and everything to do with pain. The little phone lay on the floor beside her, its screen glowing in the dark, playing that ghost of a memory over and over. It filled the cold, empty room with the sounds of a life she'd had. The sounds of a joy she had traded for a brand, the sounds of a love she had abandoned and then tried and failed to steal back. I like to think that in the echoing silence of that empty apartment, something in my daughter finally broke for the better. A person can't begin to build a new life until the old one has been burned to the ground, and hers was nothing but ash. We didn't speak for a long time after that day. The silence was different this time. It wasn't heavy with unspoken threats, but light with the space for something new to grow, if it was meant to. 6 months later, the world had turned. The chill of early spring had given way to the warm, hazy glow of a late summer evening. I was in my backyard, standing by the grill, the familiar, comforting smell of grilling burgers hanging in the air, the sound of Liam, now 20, tinkering with the engine of an old Mustang he'd bought for a song and was painstakingly restoring, was a steady, rhythmic counterpoint to the laughter of Noah and his friends as they tossed a football across the lawn. My granddaughter Maya came bursting through the back door, waving a thick envelope in her hand. "I got in!" she screamed, her face shining with a light that had nothing to do with a camera flash. "Full scholarship to the State University's art program." I wrapped her in a hug, my heart feeling like it might just split open with pride. This was it. This was the victory. It wasn't in a sterile conference room. It was here, in the scent of cut grass and charcoal, in the sight of my grandson's grease-stained hands bringing an old engine back to life, in the crisp paper of a college acceptance letter, earned through pure talent and hard work. This was the life Robert and I had wanted for them, a real life. My gray file box, The Chronicle, is back in its drawer, locked away. Its job is done. It's not an arsenal anymore. It's just a history book. A quiet reminder that a life built on bedrock, on the solid, unglamorous truths of scraped knees and packed lunches and paid bills, will always withstand the storm. Jessica and Brent had built their life on sand, a beautiful, sparkling sandcastle of a brand that the first small wave of reality had washed away completely. I did get a letter from her, about a month ago. It was short, written on plain notebook paper, the handwriting shaky. She's working as a receptionist at a dentist's office. She's in therapy. She didn't ask for money or forgiveness. She just wrote, "I am trying to learn how to be a person my children would one day want to know. I am sorry for the ghosts I made you carry." It was the first honest thing she'd said to me in 13 years. I wrote back and told her that was a good place to start, and that the rest would be up to her, and eventually, up to the kids. Love, as it turns out, isn't a feeling. It isn't a birthright. It's an action. It's a verb. It's the 1,000 nearly invisible choices you make every single day. It's grilling the burgers, proofreading the college essay, showing up to the parent-teacher conference. It's the meticulous, thankless, beautiful work of building a life for someone else. You don't get to own the title of parent just because of biology. You have to show up and earn it, day after day. So let me ask you, when you look at the life you're building, is it a curated photo for others to admire, or is it a sturdy home for the people you love? If this story resonated with you, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about finding the strength to protect what matters most.